Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. A note on today's episode. I recorded it before I realized my microphone is clearly dying. So today's episode will not be up to my normal standards of crystal clarity. I will be getting a new, better microphone as soon as possible, and hopefully that will make the audio on future episodes better than it has ever been on past episodes. Obviously, I recognize my audio has never been crystal clear. Anyway, just a note about the lower audio quality for this episode. Everything should still be intelligible. And now, on to your questions.
Speaking anecdotally, I have noticed when I am sleep deprived, something occurs to me or I am unwell, I lose attention and sometimes daydream. Is this what Ayn Rand meant by focus? How should I think about these kinds of situations? Can you be volitionally focused while there are other factors making it hard to think clearly? Yes, outside factors can make it hard to think clearly. Focus always has an object. There's no such thing as being focused without being focused on anything. And so the nature of what's around you to focus on makes a difference. Imagine someone's banging pots and pans around. Well, that makes it hard to think. It doesn't make it hard to focus per se. It's more that it makes you involuntarily focus on the banging, on the loud sounds, rather than on whatever you want to be thinking about. So you see what's going on here. It's not that you're not focused. It's that your context causes you to be focused on something other than thinking. The same thing is true with pain of any intensity. Obviously, the higher the intensity, the harder it is to focus on anything else. Now, that's not being unfocused. It's having your attention drawn to something that is insisting on occupying your focal awareness. But it makes it hard to think about other things, to focus on other things. And so that is how your context can make it hard to think clearly. Now, I don't think it's ever difficult to focus per se, so long as you are in a situation where that's possible to you. Take sleep deprivation. Well, even when you're really tired, you can still focus up until the point where you involuntarily fall asleep. Now, it's no limitation on focus that you can't will yourself to stay awake forever in any context. Your being able to stay awake depends on your having something worth focusing on. If you're just lying in bed watching a boring movie and you've been awake for 36 hours, you may be unable to stop yourself from falling asleep unless you get up and do some jumping jacks. But you can't keep yourself awake through pure will. Now, you could if your context were different, if you had something exciting to focus on. If you got a text message saying a madman had taken your girlfriend hostage, you would perk up because now there's something worth focusing on. So your context matters. You don't focus in a void. When you focus, you're always focusing on something. Being focused just means paying attention to what you know you should be paying attention to. Now, this ties in with the last part of your question, which is recognizing a lack of attention and the need to do something about it an act of focus? No. If that were an act of focus, that would be a real problem, wouldn't it? If you needed to focus in order to know that you should focus, then you couldn't morally blame anyone for not focusing. And every act of focus would be arbitrary. Being unfocused is not the same thing as being unconscious. When you're unfocused, you're drifting. You're still aware on some baseline level, and you are aware enough to know that you need to focus. In any situation where you know that you can focus, you know that you should, even before you focus. That's just there. That's the baseline that is always present, so long as you are conscious and capable of focusing. People often treat this subject in a rationalistic way, but just introspect and think about what you do. I'm sure you've experienced drifting. I'm sure you have experienced calling yourself back to attention and thinking, what should I be thinking about and doing right now? You can let your mind wander, or you can pay attention to what you know you should be paying attention to. It's no more difficult to understand than that. And when you are just sitting there daydreaming, the knowledge that you shouldn't be never goes away. It's always there. I'm not saying daydreaming is always wrong. Again, this depends on your context. If you're in a public school with a boring teacher who is teaching you nonsense, then looking out the window and daydreaming may be appropriate, because that's the best thing you have to focus on. To the extent problems like ADHD are real, they do relate to focus, but it's not that you lack the ability to focus. It's that focusing doesn't generate the interest it should. I don't have any scientific knowledge about this, but knowing how the world is today, I would bet that most short attention spans are psychological problems and not problems with people's brains, but it's not inconceivable that people can have some kind of brain damage that prevents focus from having the effects it should. Maybe an analogy to literal focus will be helpful. Imagine you see a car driving toward you, but your eyes aren't focused on it. It's in your vision, but as a blur. You're focused on something else. Now that is a state of being unfocused. Again, focus, being in focus, is contextual. It means focusing on what you should be focused on. So in this scenario, you should be focused on the car driving toward you. But you're not. Let's just say you're sitting there and you're just in a blur, in a daze, just staring off into space. Now, what's true about this situation? One, you're not focused on the car, but two, it is in your awareness in some form, and it's in your awareness such that you know you should focus on it, but you still have the choice to. So don't make the mistake of thinking, well, if it's in my awareness, I must be focused on it. How could I know it's there if I weren't focused on it? Well, because it can be there, but hazy or in the background. Again, being unfocused is not being unconscious. It's not being focused. It's not paying attention. Just like you can see this car coming, but you can still be staring into space and refuse to focus on the car to know how far it is from you or who's in it. Maybe you're waiting for your friend who's coming to pick you up, so you know you should look at the car, but you're just in a daze staring out, and you don't look at the car. That's how focus works. Focus just means, given my baseline awareness, over which I have no choice, at least at this moment, given that I'm not asleep, given that I am conscious, even if I were to just let go of the steering wheel, my sense organs are still feeding me information. I'm still aware of something so long as I'm conscious. And so I know I should be focused on something. I have to focus on what's important in any given context if I'm going to survive. Obviously, if I did that right now, I already have a store of knowledge. It's not like I just popped into existence in the room I'm in right now. So it wouldn't be purely my sensory perceptual data that I was going on, because I know what's outside, and I know what's down the street, and I know all kinds of things about money I need and all of that. But the point is, given what you are aware of, you are given a certain baseline of awareness, and then it's up to you to focus on what's important within that. Next question, how much and what kind of generalizing ought an average person to do in their own life? I'm assuming they are not theoretical scientists, philosophers, or intellectuals. Is having proper concepts and making proper identifications enough, or do you need to make new integrations in day-to-day life? What is the proper policy towards induction and conceptualization for the man on the street? Do it all the time. New is a relative term. You talk about theoretical scientists, philosophers, and intellectuals, implying that you are taking new to mean new for all mankind. But there's also just new to you. Millions of people have built tables using planks of wood and saws and hammers and nails. But if you don't know how to do it, and you learn how to do it, that's new to you, and you would be forming some new concepts, possibly, and at least making some new generalizations. So the average person may not often be figuring things out no one has ever figured out before, but he'll be figuring out things he hasn't figured out before. Even my proverbial Taco Bell cashier is forming new concepts and making new generalizations. He would have to form new concepts about food preparation or different phases of work when you're working with food, or different kinds of ingredients he is not familiar with, hasn't seen before. And then he would have to make generalizations about how lettuce interacts with other ingredients, etc., when certain food items go bad, how they go together on taco shell, and how they taste in different mixtures. I mean, there are all kinds of things, new things he would be learning. And conceptualization and induction are all that learning new things reduces to. That is what it means to learn something new. If you've learned something new, then you've formed a new concept or identified a causal connection. That's all learning something new ever means. So the question really is, how often should people be learning new things? And you should be learning new things all the time. Learning new things is how you achieve ever greater values, and that's what we're all here for. So don't do this Platonic thing where you regard epistemology as something that applies only to the lofty, by which you mean abstract. I'm not necessarily accusing you, the questioner, of doing this, but your question implies you may be doing it. In any case, don't think of induction or generalization as something only philosophers and theoretical scientists do. The Taco Bell worker who has to understand that lettuce goes bad after a certain period of time in a certain temperature has made a generalization, a valuable one. This reminds me of something that always struck me in Plato. I think it's in the Parmenides, the dialogue, the Parmenides, where Socrates is talking to Parmenides and discussing his idea of the theory of forms. This is probably really Plato's idea, but he has Socrates discuss it with Parmenides. And it's a criticism of the flaws, or a portion of this is about what might be wrong with the theory of forms, what doesn't quite make sense. And one of the things they bring up is that if there's a world of forms and the material world is just a reflection of that, then there must be a form of mud, a perfect, everlasting, immaterial, non-physical form of mud. And this causes Socrates some consternation. And I remember that struck me when I first read it because it made me realize in concrete terms what Plato's method was. Whether you find it appealing that there would be an eternal form of mud should have nothing to do with whether the theory is true. But for Plato, this was obviously relevant. So don't fall into that with, well, anything, but don't fall into it here with epistemology. Even though these are important, fundamental, lofty ideas, they apply to the real world. And yeah, you can form inductions about mud and rotten lettuce. So don't think like Plato about this. In today's world, how much should a man invest in romantic relationships? Given the culture and the sense of life of most people out there today, does it make sense to be out pursuing women actively? And if so, what should one do? Well, I agree with you, the pickings are slim, but I would say it still makes sense to pursue a romantic relationship given how much they add to your life. If you were on a desert island and you knew there was no one else around, obviously it would be foolish, but I don't think we're in a context where you can know there's no one worthwhile out there. So at the very least, I'd keep my eyes open. And if you want to pursue it actively, then I'd use an online dating site. I used OkCupid, but they nuked that from my perspective a while back, and it does not work nearly as well as it used to, and I haven't found a good replacement. Anyway, questioner goes on, I have recently become interested in a romantic relationship, but I haven't achieved anything great or worth celebrating in that kind of way. Is that wrong? Can an undistinguished person have romantic values? Definitely. If by distinguished you mean you've achieved something great in your career, no, you don't have to do that before you can have a romantic relationship. You've achieved something. Presumably, you've at least built some kind of character, or it's possible for you to have built a kind of character worth celebrating. You can be taking whatever steps are necessary to achieve the career and values you want. So no, you don't have to wait until you're a massive success to have a romantic relationship. A romantic relationship is about a celebration of values. It's about two people responding to each other's sense of life and values and way of being in the world. And you can certainly have a way of being in the world that is worth celebrating before it has resulted in existential success, major existential success, career success. So let's say you want to be a computer programmer. You've learned coding, you're working on projects, you're doing a side job to make money to get by. Well, in that situation, you haven't achieved success as a programmer yet, but a romantic relationship would be totally possible in that situation. You're the kind of person who's going after the goal even before you achieve it. You have to be, logically. And being that kind of person is worth celebrating. You'll have even more to celebrate after you've been successful, but that doesn't mean you have nothing to celebrate romantically before you've been successful. So I wouldn't worry about that in principle. Just worry about whether you've made yourself the kind of person who has something to celebrate. Not whether it's possible, because it definitely is possible.
If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.